The history of the kings of Israel occupies a central place in the biblical narrative and represents one of the most important periods in the history of the Hebrew people. Before the establishment of the monarchy, Israel was governed by judges, leaders raised up by God at specific times to guide the people and liberate them from their enemies. However, as time passed, the Israelites began to desire a system of government similar to that of neighboring nations and asked the prophet Samuel to give them a king. Although Samuel warned the people about the risks of the monarchy, God allowed their request to be granted. Thus began a new phase in the history of Israel, marked by military conquests, economic prosperity, internal conflicts, religious reforms, and spiritual crises. Accounts of this period are found primarily in the books of 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, and 1 and 2 Chronicles. The Bible does not present kings solely as political rulers. Each king is primarily evaluated by his faithfulness to God. Thus, a reign considered successful from a military or economic standpoint could receive a negative evaluation if the ruler promoted idolatry or strayed from divine commandments. Similarly, kings who faced political difficulties could be praised for their spiritual dedication. The history of the Israelite monarchy begins with Saul, passes through the period of splendor under David and Solomon, traverses the division of the kingdom into two independent nations, and ends with the destruction of Israel by the Assyrians and of Judah by the Babylonians. It is a narrative rich in historical events, moral lessons, and reflections on leadership, faith, and responsibility. Saul, the first king of Israel. Saul was the first king of Israel. Belonging to the tribe of Benjamin, he initially stood out for his physical appearance, courage, and leadership ability. According to the Bible, he was chosen by God through the prophet Samuel. Early in his reign, Saul won important victories against enemy peoples, especially the Ammonites and the Philistines. These conquests helped strengthen national unity and gave the people the sense of security they desired when they asked for a king. However, Saul faced difficulties related to obeying divine instructions. On one occasion, he offered sacrifices without waiting for Samuel, assuming a role that was not his to perform. In another episode, he failed to fully comply with an order received during a military campaign against the Amalekites. These actions were interpreted as signs of disobedience. Samuel then declared that God had rejected Saul as king and would choose another man to rule Israel. From that moment on, Saul became increasingly insecure and distrustful. When David began to gain popularity after defeating Goliath, Saul started to see him as a threat. The king tried several times to eliminate his future successor. For years, David lived on the run to preserve his life. The final years of Saul's reign were marked by emotional instability, military difficulties, and political isolation. His death occurred during a battle against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. Wounded and fearing capture, he took his own life. This brought an end to the first reign in the history of Israel. David, the king who unified Israel. David is considered one of the most important characters in the Bible. Born in Bethlehem, he was the youngest son of Jesse and worked as a shepherd when he was chosen by God to succeed Saul. His fame began when he faced Goliath, the Philistine giant who terrorized the Israelite army. While experienced soldiers refused to engage in combat, David demonstrated faith in God and defeated his opponent using only a sling and a stone. After Saul's death, David became king of Judah. Some years later, he was recognized by all the Israelite tribes as the ruler of a unified nation. One of his greatest achievements was the conquest of Jerusalem, transforming it into the political and religious capital of the kingdom. The city occupied a strategic position and came to symbolize national unity. Militarily, David considerably expanded the borders of Israel. He defeated the Philistines, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, and other neighboring peoples. As a result, Israel became a regional power. In addition to being a warrior and administrator, David is also remembered for his profound spirituality. Many psalms are traditionally attributed to him. These texts reveal his faith, his emotions, and his relationship with God. Despite his qualities, David was not perfect. The episode involving Bathsheba and Uriah represents one of the most difficult moments of his life. After committing adultery and causing Uriah's death, he was confronted by the prophet Nathan. David acknowledged his error and demonstrated sincere repentance. The consequences of this sin affected his family. Rebellions, internal disputes, and personal tragedies marked the following years. Among these conflicts, the revolt led by his son Absalom stood out. Even in the face of these difficulties, David remained a model of faithfulness for later generations. The Bible frequently uses his example as a benchmark for evaluating other kings. Solomon, the reign of wisdom and prosperity after David's death, Solomon ascended the throne. His reign is often seen as the most prosperous period in Israel's history. Early in his reign, God offered him the opportunity to make a request. Instead of asking for riches or power, Solomon asked for wisdom to govern the people. According to the biblical narrative, God granted his request and gave him extraordinary knowledge. His reputation for wisdom spread to various regions. Foreign rulers traveled to Jerusalem to hear him speak. The visit of the Queen of Sheba became one of the most famous episodes of his reign. Solomon promoted intense economic development. International trade grew, new routes were established, and great wealth was accumulated. His greatest achievement was the construction of the Temple in Jerusalem. This magnificent building became the center of Israelite religious life. The dedication of the temple represented a moment of great national celebration. However, Solomon's final years were marked by problems. His numerous marriages to foreign women facilitated the introduction of pagan religious practices. Furthermore, high taxes and forced labor generated discontent among various tribes. When Solomon died, the accumulated tensions contributed to a crisis that would result in the division of the kingdom. The division of the kingdom after Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam ascended the throne. Early in his reign, representatives from the northern tribes requested a reduction in taxes and labor requirements. The most experienced advisors recommended that the king adopt a conciliatory stance. However, Rehoboam preferred to follow the advice of younger advisors and responded harshly. The decision sparked a revolt. 10 tribes broke away from Jerusalem and chose Jeroboam as their leader. Thus, 2 independent kingdoms emerged, the Kingdom of Israel in the north, with its capital later established in Samaria. The Kingdom of Judah, in the south, maintained Jerusalem as its capital. This division would forever change the history of the Hebrew people. The kings of the Kingdom of Israel Jeroboam I was the founder of the northern kingdom. Fearing that his subjects would continue traveling to Jerusalem to worship, he established religious centers in Bethel and Dan. This decision is presented in the Bible as a grave spiritual error. His son Nadab reigned for a short time before being assassinated by Baasha. Baasha established a new dynasty, but maintained the religious practices condemned by the prophets. After him came Elah and Zimri. The latter ruled for only a few days before dying during a civil war. Omri assumed power and politically strengthened the kingdom. His greatest achievement was the founding of Samaria, which became the permanent capital of Israel. His son Ahab distinguished himself both for his administrative abilities and for his religious infidelity. Married to Jezebel, he intensely promoted the worship of Baal. During his reign, the prophet Elijah was active, responsible for memorable confrontations against idolatry. After Ahab, Ahaziah and Joram ruled. Both continued policies similar to those of their father. Jehu led a revolution that eliminated the house of Ahab. He also promoted the destruction of many centers of Baal worship. However, he did not completely abandon the practices initiated by Jeroboam. Jehoahaz faced intense military pressure from his enemies. His son Jehoash managed to recover some of the national strength. Jeroboam too presided over a period of economic prosperity and territorial expansion. However, prophets such as Amos and Hosea denounced the corruption and social injustices that existed in the kingdom. After his death, political instability rapidly increased. Zechariah was assassinated. Shallum ruled for only a month. Menahem maintained power through alliances with Assyria. Pekahiah was assassinated by Pekah. Pekah tried to resist the Assyrian advance, but faced great difficulties. Finally, Hosea became the last king of Israel. During his reign, the powerful Assyrian Empire conquered Samaria in 722 BC. Much of the population was deported. The kingdom of Israel ceased to exist as an independent political entity. The kings of the kingdom of Judah, while the northern kingdom continued on its path, Judah remained under the rule of David's descendants. Rehoboam faced constant conflict after the division of the kingdom. His son Abijah continued the fight against Israel. Asa was considered one of the good kings of Judah. He promoted religious reforms, fought against idolatry, and sought to strengthen the worship of the God of Israel. His successor Jehoshaphat continued these reforms. He invested in the administration of justice and encouraged the teaching of the law among the people. Jehoram, however, turned away from that path. Influenced by alliances with the house of Ahab, he promoted religious practices condemned by the prophets. His son Ahaziah had a brief reign. After his death, his mother Athaliah took power. She was the only woman to rule Judah. Her reign was marked by the persecution of the Davidic royal line. Later, Joash was crowned king while still a child. Under the guidance of the priests, he restored the temple and promoted important reforms. Amaziah ruled after him and achieved some military victories, but ultimately faced political difficulties. Uzziah had a long reign marked by economic prosperity, agricultural development, and military strengthening. However, his pride led him to commit acts considered improper for his religious role. Jotham maintained the stability of the kingdom and continued several administrative projects. Ahaz represented a period of spiritual regression. He promoted idolatrous practices and established controversial alliances with foreign powers. Hezekiah, one of the greatest kings of Judah, Hezekiah is remembered as one of the best kings of Judah. Upon assuming the throne, he initiated profound religious reforms. He destroyed pagan altars, restored the temple, and sought to centralize worship in Jerusalem once again. These measures aimed to strengthen the spiritual identity of the people. His reign coincided with the height of the Assyrian Empire. When Jerusalem was threatened, Hezekiah sought divine help and consulted the prophet Isaiah. According to the biblical account, the city was miraculously preserved. This event further strengthened his reputation as a faithful ruler. Manasseh and Amon. After Hezekiah's death, his son Manasseh ascended the throne. His reign was one of the longest in Judah's history. Initially, he promoted intense idolatry and reversed many of the reforms carried out by his father. Biblical tradition associates his reign with increased religious corruption. Later, however, the biblical text recounts that Manasseh repented and sought reconciliation with God. His son Amon continued the negative practices and ended up being assassinated by conspirators. Josiah, the great reformer Josiah, became king at a young age and is considered one of the greatest rulers of Judah. During renovations at the temple, a copy of the law was found. Upon hearing it read aloud, Josiah realized how far the nation had strayed from God's commandments. He then initiated a broad religious reform. Pagan altars were destroyed, idolatrous practices were combated, and the celebration of Easter was restored. His government represented an attempt at national spiritual renewal. However, his premature death in battle brought an end to this period of hope. The last kings of Judah after Josiah, the political situation became increasingly difficult. Jehoahaz reigned for only a few months before being deposed. Jehoiakim reigned during the rise of Babylonian power. His relationship with the prophet Jeremiah was marked by conflict. Joachim assumed the throne for a brief period and was eventually taken captive to Babylon. Finally, Zedekiah became the last king of Judah. Despite Jeremiah's warnings, he rebelled against the Babylonians. The response was devastating. In 586 BC, Jerusalem was besieged, conquered, and destroyed. The temple built by Solomon was burned down. Much of the population was deported into exile. With that, the kingdom of Judah came to an end. The role of prophets during the monarchy. Throughout the entire monarchical period, prophets played a fundamental role. They were not only religious leaders, but also advisors, critics, and messengers of God. Samuel guided Saul and David. Nathan confronted David after his sin. Elijah and Elisha challenged kings of the northern kingdom. Isaiah advised Hezekiah during the Assyrian crisis. Jeremiah warned the last kings of Judah about the Babylonian threat. Prophets such as Amos, Hosea, Micah, and Zephaniah denounced social injustices, corruption, and idolatry. Their messages sought to lead the people to repentance and faithfulness. The constant presence of prophets demonstrates that the Bible interprets the political history of Israel from a spiritual perspective. The fall of the two kingdoms, the destruction of Israel and Judah, is presented in the Bible as a consequence of a long process of spiritual estrangement. The northern kingdom persisted in religious practices considered inappropriate since the days of Jeroboam. Despite prophetic warnings, its rulers rarely promoted significant reforms. As a consequence, Assyria conquered Samaria in 722 BC. Judah survived for more than a century after the fall of Israel. Some kings, such as Hezekiah and Josiah, attempted to restore religious faithfulness. However, prolonged periods of idolatry and injustice weakened the nation. In 586 BC, the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, definitively ending the Davidic monarchy as an independent political institution. Conclusion: the history of the kings of Israel constitutes one of the richest and most complex narratives in the Bible. From Saul, the first monarch, to Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, the Israelite monarchy went through periods of glory, prosperity, conflict, decline, and destruction. David and Solomon represented the pinnacle of national power. The division of the kingdom revealed internal weaknesses accumulated over time. The kings of the north and south faced political, military, and religious challenges that profoundly shaped the destiny of their nations. In evaluating these rulers, the Bible emphasizes that true success did not depend solely on wealth, military power, or international influence. The decisive element was faithfulness to God and a commitment to justice. For this reason, kings like David, Hezekiah, and Josiah are remembered positively, while others have become examples of the dangers of idolatry, arrogance, and disobedience. The narrative of the kings of Israel remains relevant because it presents profound reflections on leadership, moral responsibility, faith, and the consequences of human choices. More than a simple sequence of political events, the history of the Israelite monarchy is presented as a demonstration of the relationship between God and His people, highlighting the importance of obedience, repentance, and hope even in times of crisis.